Welcome everyone, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to get started and how to use soft plastics, from setups to lures, jig heads and techniques. I'm going to be covering it all today to hopefully give you a better understanding on how to use and how to fish with soft plastics. First of all, we're going to be covering setups. So that involves the rod, reel, line and leader. So this rod, which I have in my hands here, is pretty much what you want to look for. It's the ideal soft plastics fishing rod, and I'm just going to go over a few features which it has and what you should also look for. So the first thing is that the line class is 1 to 3 kilo. I would be looking from anything to 1 to 3 kilo up to about 2 to 4 kilo for soft plastics fishing. They're pretty much perfect for casting around the lightweight soft plastics and just all round a good start to go with. The next key feature is that this rod is about 7 foot long. I think it's exactly 7 foot long, and I would be looking at a rod from the 6.6 range up to about the 7.6. Those are pretty much the perfect length rods for casting soft plastics, retrieving soft plastics. And the final thing which this rod has is a very, very sensitive tip. It does have a bit of backbone, but up towards the end of the rod, it's very light and nimble, which means you can detect when those fish are eating your soft plastic. It's very distinct. Pick up when a fish eats your lure. So you want to be able to feel that with a really nice sensitive rod. So that's pretty much the rod covered. Overview again, we just want a lightweight rod, 1 to 3 kilo, 7 foot long with a very sensitive tip. So we've got our rod, and now we need a reel to pair up with it. So I would be choosing a 1000 to 2000 size reel if you've got a 1 to 3 kilo or 2 to 4 kilo rod. The 1000 and the 2000s are perfect. And that is because you want your combo to be evenly balanced. You want the weight throughout the whole combo to be fairly even so that it's not awkward to use, or it's not bottom heavy, or it's not top heavy with the rod. So the 1000 to 2000 size reels are typically very small, and you can kind of get a sense here that these two are going to pair up very, very nicely together. And also the smaller reels, they hold probably, well, they hold enough line. They hold 100 to 150 meters of line, and that's more than enough for a beginner and the fish which we're going to be targeting. Okay, we're just going to put the reel and pair it up with this rod. So we've put it in that little groove there. We're just going to screw it down, and you can see when you put your finger there down near the butt of the rod, it is very, very evenly distributed, the weight. So it's not tipping one way or the other way, it is just the perfect balance. And that means it's going to be very easy to work soft plastics later on, easy to cast, pretty much makes it easier to do absolutely everything. So when you are choosing a combo, if you go into a store, make sure that it's evenly balanced and that it's going to be very, very light, because we're going to do a lot of casting, covering a lot of water, and the lighter the combo, the easier this is going to be to do. So we've got our combo, now we need some line to go onto the reel. So on this one in particular, I have 4-pound braid and 6-pound leader, and that's roughly what I would recommend for beginners. You can probably go from 4 to 8-pound braid and 6 to 12-pound leader. Now, what is the difference between braid and leader? Well, braid is what takes up the majority of the spool. Most of your spool is going to be filled up with braid, and that is because it is just a very, very good casting material. You can cast a long way, you can pick up a lot more bites, and it's very, very sensitive in comparison to mono or fluorocarbon line. So braid is what I would recommend, and pretty much a necessity if you are going to start soft plastics fishing. Leader, on the other hand, is a much more thicker line, but it is also much more abrasion resistant, and it's also harder to see. You'll notice if you're just using straight braid in the water, it's very, very easy to see. It's a thin line, but it stands out in the water much more compared to fluorocarbon. So we definitely want a fluorocarbon or monofilament leader to go on top of the braid, and usually you'll have about a rod's length of fluorocarbon. We'll get into that in just a second, but that's what I would recommend for line. So now what I'm going to do is get some 6-pound fluorocarbon and tie that onto my 4-pound braid using a double uni knot. Okay, so this is how we're going to tie our double uni knot. So we have our braid in our left hand, our fluoro in our right. So we've crossed those over. I'm just going to pinch those in the middle, get the braid and actually do a loop. So I'm going to loop it over like that, and you can see it's created a real nice loop. And all I'm going to do with this tag end is thread it back through the loop we've made about 10 times.
There's one. So we just keep going back through that loop, threading the line through, around, through, around. Hopefully you can get the idea. So with braid we do it 10 times because it's much more likely to slip. But with fluorocarbon leader, we're only going to need to do it half the amount, so roughly 5 times. And that's because braid's a lot more slippy, a lot more thin, so you need to do double the amount. Okay, so now we just need to pull this tag end tight. You can see it's pulled down into a very fine little knot, and now we just need to do the other side of the double uni over here. So I've just flipped that around. So now we just need to do the same thing yet again with the fluoro. So we've done a loop, now we just need to thread the line back through that loop 5 times. 5 times. So that's pretty good. Once again, we're going to pull that tight. And I'm just going to add some spit onto both of these and then pull them tight. Okay, so we're just going to pull those tight. So the 2 knots come together in the middle. And that is our double uni knot. So I'm going to trim these 2 tags, and then I'm going to get roughly 7 feet of this fluorocarbon leader, a rod's length. So we'll cut that out and wind it onto our reel.
So our combo is now completely ready to go. And now we're going to take a deep dive into soft plastics and jig heads. So I'm going to keep it very, very simple and give you guys 2 profiles. And they're pretty much the only 2 profiles which I'll be looking at if I was a beginner. The first one being the paddle-tailed soft plastic, probably my all-time favorite, in the 2.5 and 2.75 inch size. So this one I would be looking at in the motor oil and the Sub-Zero or clearish color. Those are my 2 favorite colors. And the other profile being the curly tail grubs. Very, very iconic lures. Once again in the 2.5 inch, and once again in the motor oil and clear see-through type colors. So with these 2 lures, they will keep you more than covered. And once you get a little bit better, a bit more experience, you can experiment more. But if you just want to catch a fish, get out there and catch a fish, and I would be using these lures. So now that we've chosen our profiles, we now need a jig head to go along with the soft plastics. Now, I'm going to recommend you 1 packet of jig heads, and this will pretty much keep you covered. This is the ultimate jig head for the soft plastics which we've chosen, and almost the only one which you'll need. So this is the Headlock Z Finesse series with a 1/0 hook and a 1/8 weight. You can vary on the weight a little bit depending on the conditions, but to get started I would be using the 1/8. It's a very, very good all-round weight, and it just gets the job done. So we have our soft plastic, we have our jig head. Now we want to put the soft plastic onto the jig head. So what we want is to kind of measure them up so we can see that roughly that jig head's going to come out slightly less than halfway down the plastic. So we want to go right through the top here. So go right through the top. Try and keep it centered as well. Try and keep that plastic centered. Push that all the way down and then out. So you can see that we've tried to keep it on the center line of that plastic. I'm going to push that all the way on to that lure, and that looks pretty good. You can see that it's slightly less than halfway down the lure, but we have plenty of hook exposure. It still looks natural, and that shouldn't spin when we're fishing with it as well. So it's almost the perfect presentation. So if you can aim for that, even if it takes a couple of times, keep trying to re-rig it as straight as you can, because it will catch you more fish. So now that we've rigged it up, this is exactly what your finished product should look like. So you can see that the jig head is coming out roughly a little bit less than halfway down the plastic. It's rigged up nice and straight, and that's a massive key factor. You want the soft plastic to be rigged straight, because otherwise it's going to have an unnatural action. We're trying to make this look like a real fish, so when it darts up it's nice and straight, that tail's wiggling, and it looks exactly like a bait fish. If it's not straight, it might have an unnatural action, it might do some curling stuff, it might spin in the water. But if it's rigged nice and straight, exactly like that, and it's going to be streamlined. Streamlined in the water, tail's going to be wagging, and you'll catch more fish with a soft plastic which is rigged correctly. So that's pretty much the basics with the rod. We have our combo ready to go. We have a soft plastic with a jig head, which I'm about to tie on using a Uni Knot. and then we're going to get into some of the basic techniques and methods for soft plastics fishing. So we've just put the line through the jig head once. Now we're going to loop it underneath, so we get it underneath the line and back over the top to create our circle again, and we're just going to thread the tag back through that hole 4 or 5 times. This is a lot harder to do on camera, but you can see that the tag ends up there, and we just want to push it back through that hole. We do that 5 times, so that's 5 times. We just want to pull that tight. Pull that down. Once again, that is almost absolutely perfect, so the knot's right down onto the jig head. We're just going to trim that little bit of line there, and then we're going to be ready to fish. All right, we're ready to put it all into action now. We have our rod, reel, line, leader, and lure. So I've chosen the paddle-tailed soft plastic. Now we're going to get into a little bit of technique, but first of all, we're going to check our drag. So it's almost good enough, a little bit tighter. We want it tight enough so that the lure and the hook sets into the fish's jaw when it eats it, but when it goes to take off, we want it to pull drag and obviously not snap the line. We've got fairly light line, 4 pound, so we do want a fairly loose drag because we don't need it too tight and we don't want to risk snapping off too easily. So we're just going to cast that out now. I'm fishing a smaller system. If you can, cast towards a bank or an edge. So I'm going to cast towards the other side of this system. Flick that out over there. And the first thing I'm going to do is watch the line. I'm going to watch the line to see when it hits the bottom. So it'll be a nice steady drop, and then you'll just see a big belly in the line. It's a lot easier to see on calm days like today. So I'm just going to flick that out. I've seen the belly in the line go slack, and then all I'm going to do is a couple of basic lifts. So I've just lifted that soft plastic into the water column, and I'm going to let it sit on the bottom for 2 to 3 seconds. So I've just seen that again, lift, lift. I'm watching the line for the belly, and there it goes. So it'll be sinking nicely, and then there'll be a big belly in the line all of a sudden. And that's when you give it a few more flicks. So I'm watching it again. There's the big belly, flick, flick. So I'm doing it nice and slow at the moment so you guys can see, but you do want to speed this up a little bit. So you go flick, flick, watch the line, hit the bottom there, give it a second or two, and then keep it moving. So very, very basic. So the main thing is line control. That's pretty much the key to soft plastics fishing and catching fish and feeling the fish bite. It's all line control. So I'm going to cast that out. As soon as that hits the water, I'm going to flip the bail arm over. I know I'm not fishing too deep, and if you're getting started, you don't want to fish too deep water. You want to try stay shallow so that it's a lot easier to work the lures and just get used to the technique. So it's hit the bottom, the belly's occurred in the line. Now I'm just going to go flick, flick, and let that sink back down to the bottom. So it's a very, very simple technique. Once you get the hang of it, you can do a little bit quicker. Bang, bang, watch the line, watch the line. So you'll notice that every time I do a few flicks, I'm winding in a little bit of slack, because when I'm pulling that lure along, obviously it's coming back towards me, so you want to wind up the slack when you do that. Make sure you keep in contact with the lure, but also keep it moving. So flick, flick, pause. The pauses are very, very important when you're fishing. A lot of these fish will grab the lure when it's actually not doing anything. So although you might want to keep on whipping it, keep on moving it around, one of the best things you can actually do to catch fish is to keep it sitting still. You want to do a couple of flicks, get some movement going in the lure, but then you want to pause it. You want that lure to stay still, just because these fish can sometimes be picky. They might have seen a lure before, or they might be looking for a bait fish which is very weak. And that action where it's just only slightly chugging along, pausing all the time, it might resemble a dead fish and just trigger them to eat it. So nothing on that cast. I'm going to do the same thing again, cast out and do pretty much rinse and repeat. Another key to soft plastics fishing is to move around. Don't fish the same water too much. You want to have a few casts in the one spot. If you don't get anything, move along. There's heaps of water out there to fish, so you don't want to stay in the one spot for too long and waste your time. Usually if there's predatory fish in the area, when you're fishing soft plastics, they'll eat it very quickly. So I'm going to have 3 or 4 casts here, and then I'll move along and just pretty much rinse and repeat the technique until we get a little bit of interest. So we've been fishing for a fair while now and we haven't got a bite. So I'm going to give you guys a few more tips and tricks to try and encourage those fish to eat when they are being finicky. and playing hard to get. So I've been using the one profiled soft plastic the whole time, the paddle tail, but what I would do is switch it up. Sometimes these fish will be dialed in on a certain food and a certain presentation, and you might not be using it. So change over to the curly tail grub, which we had on earlier, and then have a few more casts with that. Another thing you can do is use scent. I didn't bring any with me today, but scent can be a huge factor. You just get a tiny amount. You don't need a lot. You don't want to completely cover the lure and smother it. You just get almost just enough to cover your fingernail. Enough to cover your fingernail and then slightly rub it on the lure. That's all you need, and that'll also encourage a bite sometimes. So just the small things all add up, and eventually you will catch those fish. So far for me, I haven't had any luck, and that's how it's going to be for a lot of new people as well. It took me a long time to catch my first fish on a soft plastic, and I know that it can be a big challenge. So I hope that today you've learned something, you've taken something from this video. You can go out there and apply it and hopefully had more luck than I did on my first trip. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share it around, and thanks for watching everyone. I will see you in the next video.